When resistance within Germany during the 1930s or even during the Second World War is discussed, events that come to mind are, for example, the attempt by Georg Elser to assassinate Hitler in 1939. The most famous act of resistance must undoubtedly be the July 20 plot. Klaus von Stauffenberg, together with an extensive network of other conspirators, attempted to assassinate Hitler in the Wolf's Lair, his field headquarters. Both attempts failed. In fact, all attempts on Hitler's life failed, yet there were quite a few. A topic that is a bit snowed under when discussing resistance within Germany is resistance among youth movements. One of the few movements that actively resisted the ever-increasing totalitarian grip of Hitler and his Nazi party were the Edelweiss Pirates. They were a loosely organized bunch of teenagers in different large cities that managed to establish their own subculture during one of the most oppressive regimes the world has ever seen. Youth resistance within Germany against the Nazi regime took on many different forms. Some individual forms of civil disobedience simply were to work slowly, protest against compulsory military service, refusing to join the Hitlerjugend, or to deny bringing the Hitler salute. There were groups, albeit a few, that operated in a bit more organized manner. The Edelweiss Pirates were several groups of youths opposing the ruling National Socialists. They thanked their name to their signature, a metal badge featuring the Edelweiss, a European mountain flower. It was their symbol of freedom. In essence, they were multiple loosely organized dissident youth gangs. By the end of the 1930s, their resistance against the regime started to get more severe and risky, engaging in sabotage activities and even murder. Now, in order to understand organized youth resistance against the Nazi regime, it is important to understand the context in terms of youth parties they were operating in. One of Hitler's favorite instruments to indoctrinate the youth was the Hitlerjugend, the youth wing of his party. Among its activities was sporting, marching, attending events and artistic activities, although everything had to be agreed on by the Nazi party. The underlying thought of the Hitlerjugend was that its members were prepared to carry on the National Socialist ideal for future generations. A strong emphasis on German folk culture, music, and military matters dominated the Hitlerjugend's activities. After December 36, membership to the Hitlerjugend became compulsory for all Aryan boys. Yet disregarding the totalitarian nature of Germany as the 1930s progressed, the loosely organized group of mostly working-class youths, the Edelweiss Pirates, rejected ties with all organizations supported by the Nazi Party. They shunned the increasing militarism of the Hitlerjugend, the totalitarian character of Hitler's Germany, and the constant drilling of its population. They would occasionally get in fights with the Hitlerjugend, but that's about it. In turn, they became a symbol of rebellion against the regime. Mainly, they rebelled culturally. For example, they listened to American jazz music, which was forbidden, and they let their hair grow in contrast to the sharply cut Hitlerjugend members. They distinguished themselves by wearing characteristic clothing, frequently ski shirts, hiking boots, scarves, and short lederhosen. Really, the Edelweiss Pirates can be compared to the Teddy Boys, or Teds, the British subculture that emerged in the early 1950s of young men wearing dandy clothing, with a significant difference, obviously, between these recalcitrant youths being that they emerged in Nazi Germany, one of the most repressive regimes ever. In contrast to the strict separation between boys and girls had their separate youth wing, namely the Bund Deutscher Mädel, the Edelweiss Pirates had mixed weekend trips and expeditions in nature. They sported different names in different cities. In Köln, they were known as the Navajos, in Düsseldorf as Fahrtenjungs, and in Leipzig as Ruhrpiraten or Meuten, the latter translating to as much as packs or mobs. In total, it is estimated that several thousands of youths considered themselves to be part of these gangs. Initially, the Nazi Party and SS considered their rebellion to be frivolous, describing them as morally degenerate and criminal. Still, as time progressed, they started to crack down on the youths. Membership of the Hitlerjugend obviously became compulsory in 1936, and in March 1939, the government issued the Jugenddienstpflicht, or youth service duty. All German youths were conscripted in the Hitlerjugend. If parents or teenagers objected, they were subjected to investigation by the Gestapo. Yet even though these youths resisted the ever-so-growing totalitarian nature of Hitler's regime, many sources describe them as being apolitical. Basically, they rejected any form of coercion into youth groups or armies, but most of the time there wasn't any fundamental political or ideological criticism. At least, there was no ideological criticism until the Gestapo started to interfere when some teenagers objected to joining the Hitlerjugend. Records of Gestapo interrogations show that some arrested Edelweiss pirates proclaimed the following: "Our banding together occurred primarily because the Hitlerjugend was dominated by certain compulsion to which we did not want to submit, because we wanted to go on trips as free boys." This was echoed in almost identical wording by another boy who stated, "We were opposed to the Hitlerjugend principally because we did not want to serve with it, did not want to come under its compulsion, and we wanted to spend our leisure time going on trips as free boys and to do and act as we pleased." Possibly the best statement of the motives for joining the Edelweiss Pirates comes from an arrested boy who declared in 1942, "The Hitlerjugend is responsible for it. Almost every order I received was accompanied by threats, such as arrests." As the war progressed, the actions of certain Edelweiss pirate groups grew bolder and more provocative. For example, there are many accounts of pirates shielding army deserters, joining bands of resistance fighters towards the end of the war, or starting to sabotage railways and warehouses. By mid-1943, the Nazi district leader of Grafenberg, a town in Bavaria, asked the Gestapo to put a stop to the harmful activities of the pirates. He described how during air raids and blackouts, bands of youths would congregate in a local park, affecting the morale among soldiers and civilians. They painted defeatist slurs such as "Down with Hitler" and "The High Command Lies," all over town. In Duisburg, another gang, calling themselves the Kittelbach Pirates, was known to go out on the street with brass knuckles and beat up Hitlerjugend members. There were neighborhoods where members of the Hitlerjugend no longer dared to wear their Nazi insignia in public, according to a contemporary report. Other Gestapo reports reveal that as the war progressed, they were unable to deal with these gangs of contrarian youths. In part because of the senior leadership of the Hitlerjugend kept getting drafted to the front, so local Hitlerjugend departments were led by inexperienced youths unable to stand up against the rebellious nature of the Edelweiss pirate gangs. Another report mentions the Navajos in Köln I mentioned at the beginning. In March 1940, a raid by local authorities led to the arrest of nearly 600 rebellious teenagers. They were subsequently locked up in reform institutions, yet by the fall of 1942 it became clear the organization still existed underground. One night, these Navajos, together with two other youth gangs, plastered Köln with their gang names. Later, they joined a local Edelweiss pirate gang, which occupied itself with harassing Hitlerjugend members at home and breaking into ammunition depots for acts of sabotage. Historian Daniel Horn, in a study on the matter, writes that as a final testimonial to the amazing effectiveness of the youth opposition, Himmler proclaimed the task of bringing gangs under control as being important to the war effort. Ordering immediate and stern measures, the SS chief gave additional far-reaching credit to the youth opposition when he warned that every omission or delay strengthens the activities of the cliques and undermines the trust of the population in the regime. Himmler was correct. The forcefulness and strength of the wild gangs was undermining the Hitlerjugend's entire system of youth control. Through their violence and creation of visible and increasingly popular organizational activities for disgruntled youngsters, the cliques posed a virtually insoluble threat to the Hitlerjugend. Given its inability to cope with the problem in a positive fashion, it is unlikely that the Hitlerjugend and the Nazi system of totalitarian youth control could be maintained on a permanent basis without simultaneously converting a large part of German youngsters into sullen and resentful prisoners. One of the darkest moments of the youth resistance was in November 1944. The Ehrenfeldgruppe, named after a city district in Köln, formed active resistance in Nazi Germany. 23-year-old Hans Steinbrück, who escaped from a concentration camp, led the group. Many of its members had been part of local Edelweiss pirate gangs. Initially, their actions consisted of stealing food and committing small-time robberies to sell items on the black market. Over time, their actions grew more dangerous. When during a routine check, police discovered stolen weapons and contraband, they set up a manhunt to catch Steinbrück. Feeling the police close in, together with an army deserter and several loyalists, Steinbrück went on a somewhat of a spree, which he referred to as a Nazi hunt. The rogue group shot multiple police officers and other Nazis over the next few days. He was eventually arrested and executed without a trial. In the aftermath, 63 members of the group were arrested, of whom 12 were executed. Some of the youngest members executed were only 16 years old, with most of them being in their 20s. Because the groups were loosely organized, I'm unable to give a clear account of what happened after the war ended. Some members supported the Americans and British, others rejoined the Kommunistische Partei Deutschland, in turn supporting the Soviet Union. But it appears most groups simply disbanded, which seems rather likely to be fair. One of the core tenets of the Edelweiß Pirates was that they despised politics and coercion in any way, shape, or form. Now, interestingly enough, according to historian Stefan Fritz, following the end of the Second World War, a group of loyal former Hitlerjugend members co-opted the name of the Edelweiß Pirates to carry out subversive operations in Allied-occupied Germany. So under the same name, the group consisted of quite literally the opposite of what it consisted of during the war. By March 1946, during a counterintelligence operation and subsequent raids by the Allied powers, 80 former German officers were arrested. The Allied soldiers discovered a list with over 400 names of it, which these new Edelweiß pirates wanted to assassinate. Among these people was Wilhelm Hugner, the Prime Minister of Bavaria. There were weapons, ammunition, and even anti-tank rockets found in hidden stockpiles in the woods. According to intelligence reports from the Nuremberg trials, approximately 7,000 people belonged to groups loosely associated with this terrorist cell. The main objectives of many of these cells were to blow up bridges and rail lines, attack freight trains, harass German women who fraternized with the Americans, and sabotage war crime trials. Yet, it appeared that by arresting these officers, the core of the Nazi cell was taken off the streets. There were various threats against military government officials, but thanks to an increase in patrols and intelligence officers dedicated to investigating post-war Nazi resistance, any real activities decreased as 1946 progressed. In fall that year, there was a series of bomb attacks against denazification courts in the Stuttgart area. Still, following action by the occupying government, most terrorist attacks by the Edelweiß Pirates subsided. The actions of these post-war Edelweiß Pirates had nothing to do with the previous eponymous loosely organized rebellious teenage gangs. Yet they were part of a large operation, namely Werwolf, a plan for post-war resistance by ideological diehard Nazis. It is hotly debated whether Werwolf was successful or if it is mainly remembered because of its propaganda value, however. What is for sure is that Werwolf deserves a video on its own, examining the effectiveness of post-war resistance against the Allied powers. Thank you for watching this video. If there's a topic or event you'd like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and want to support my work, consider checking me out on Patreon or becoming a channel member. For just $1 a month, you will gain access to the exclusive Patreon series. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.